Good morning, everybody. My name's Phil Swan. I'm one of the business development managers within the Continuing Professional Development Unit at Cardiff University. So first of all, a very big welcome to the very first session of this year's Spring Online School organised by the CPD unit. It's great to have so many of you joining us this morning. Firstly, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you experience any technical difficulties during the session, any sound problems, that sort of thing, myself and a couple of my colleagues will be on the line to help with that. So please use the chat feature to get in contact if you do experience any difficulties. If your Wi-Fi drops out, please just reuse the link that we sent you to join this webinar. We'll be there ready to readmit you if your line does drop out. We're also going to be doing some questions and answers at the very end of the session, so please feel free to use the questions and answers feature on the Zoom call as we go through the session, and we'll look to do those at the very end. And then finally, we are looking to record this, or we are going to be recording this session and hosting it on our YouTube channel. We do have a back catalogue of sessions from last year's summer school, so do feel free to take a look at those as well. I think that's enough from me, so I'll hand you over to our fantastic speaker, Dr. Dylan Foster-Evans. Thanks very much.
Diolch yn fawr, Phil, a bore da I chi gyd. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you very much for coming to this CPD session today on bilingual leadership. It's a lovely morning here in Cardiff. I mean, the screen behind me is fake, but actually the sunshine behind me, beyond that, is real. So it's a good positive start to the week. As Phil said, my name's Dylan Foster-Evans. I'm head of the School of Welsh at Cardiff University, so I'm an academic in charge of a unit that teaches Welsh from absolute beginners up to PhD level, and also researches and engages with the community in various manners. And I'm part, of course, of a large institution, Cardiff University. Our unit operates on a day-to-day level through the medium of Welsh, and almost all the staff speak Welsh. There are a couple who don't, but almost all the staff and almost all the students. So Welsh is the default language, so to speak. But within a wider institution, of course, that operates mainly through the medium of English. But equally, the wider institution has been on a journey and has recently developed a new Welsh language strategy, new Welsh language teaching strategies as well. So I think bilingualism is becoming much more of a norm in the wider institution year on year. So my experience, in a sense, is interesting in that it's within a Welsh language unit, a unit with a language where Welsh is the default, within a wider institution, of course, where Welsh has historically had a lower profile, but we're all working together to increase the profile of Welsh and make it more of a language of choice for everybody who wishes to choose it. So having said that, I'll share my screen with you. So hope that you can all see that there. And do feel welcome, do feel free to get in touch with me later on, as I said, through the School of Welsh at Cardiff University if you've got any questions. I see from the registrations that we have some people from Wales, some people beyond Wales, in different types of bilingual contexts. So I hope that this session will say something to all of you. Obviously, there'll be different levels of experience within Wales, I think, in the Welsh language, but it'll be delightful at the end to hear of any comments or questions that come from beyond Wales as well, because we in Wales also need to learn from our peers elsewhere as well. So what I hope to do with you today is this, help you gain an understanding of the key cultural factors that shape a bilingual workplace and workforce. Know how to create an inclusive and welcoming culture for Welsh-speaking employees, and of course, and understand basic ways of setting a positive example as leaders in a bilingual context. What I won't be doing today is discussing sort of legislation that applies in Wales around the Welsh language, the language standards that various public bodies need to adhere to. Those will vary according to different bodies and different sectors. And the best place for you to discuss that is probably with the Welsh Language Commissioner, where that's appropriate. We will touch on the Welsh Language Commissioner, but what I would like to talk about today is more general, really, about creating an atmosphere and a culture in the workplace that makes that workplace a desirable one for Welsh-speaking employees to work in, and also to apply for roles in as well. So I'll start with a very obvious point, but it's important to make this point. Language is a skill, of course it is. It's something we can learn and we can apply as a skill, but it also goes much deeper than that. It also speaks to our identity. We communicate with other people through language, and that includes our closest family, friends, work colleagues, everybody, the whole world now through the social media. We constitute our world through language, in that we experience the world through language. How we see the world, how we divide the world up into things and people and places is all dependent on the language we speak. We form and sustain relationships through language, whether that's professionally or in other fields. And I think it's fair to say that our culture is unimaginable without language. Very, very difficult to imagine our culture if you take the linguistic side out of it. Not everything in our culture is linguistic, but equally it's unimaginable, I think, without language binding it together. So language is fundamental to creating our social identity. This is true whether we speak one language or whether we speak half a dozen of them. It's equally true, but in many cases, for people who speak more than one language, these issues come to the fore in a slightly different way, in a slightly clearer way, because we're often aware that we use one language in particular ways with particular people. We use another language at other times. Sometimes there may be restrictions on the language that we use, and sometimes we can't always use the language that we would wish to do. So in being bilingual or multilingual, sometimes questions of language and identity can become more focused. On the other hand, they're also everyday, because that's how we live. My own background, I speak Welsh and I speak English. Welsh is my first language, although I don't remember ever not speaking English. So my relationship with English is very strong as well, and very emotional as well. I've never, as I said, I never had a time when I felt that I could not communicate in either of those languages. I've lived in Wales most of my life. I lived for a time in England as well. So I'm very used to using both languages, and switching between the two of them is very, very natural to me. But at times, I am aware, as any bilingual speaker is, that it's not always easy to do that. So bilingualism, I'm talking about bilingualism today, although really, probably many of you are multilingual as well. Multilingualism, I think most of the world's population is multilingual. And certainly, I'm sure there are many of you who speak more languages than I do. So what I say about bilingualism may often actually refer to multilingualism here. But the first thing I want to say, it's a positive thing. So it's something I want to be positive about. And if I'm positive about it and you're positive about it, people around you will be positive about it. And the spoiler alert there is that's the #1 message from this session. I'm going to try, if I can, to talk about things to do, do's, rather than don'ts. I think I'll fail in a couple of times because I think I do need to mention a couple of don'ts. But on the whole, it's a positive thing. So it's something to be positive about. And it's something to use language in a positive way about as well. So do this, enjoy this, rather than avoid that or don't do that. I've got an interest academically in the 19th century, and in Wales, the bilingual status of Wales was almost always referred to as the bilingual problem. That's how it was phrased. It would be in the newspapers, the bilingual problem. Thankfully, we've moved on from that, although, as most historical things, they do leave a hangover and they do leave a shadow. So we're not totally free from that mode of thinking. Bilingual also, if you speak one language, and I've always spoken two, but I can imagine that it must be difficult, if you only speak one, to imagine what it would like to speak two all the time. Equally, It's difficult for me, who's always been bilingual, to put myself in the place of someone who speaks only one language. We need to use our imagination, whatever our linguistic background, to understand the experiences of others, because it can be quite hard to imagine if you've never had to choose between two languages because you only speak one. What does that choice imply and the factors that impinge on that? If you only ever speak one language, perhaps you're not used to other people maybe judging you on your choice of language. Either way, these things do happen, not so much, but I think we need to use our imagination, whatever our background is, to put ourselves in other people's shoes when it comes to bilingualism and multilingualism. And as I said, do's, be positive about it. So I'm repeating myself there deliberately. Now then, I went on a course recently, and it was about managing people and working with others and team working. And one of the mantras in this course was that we should always speak to people before coming to any conclusions about them. Never take things for granted about people. Always listen to people to learn about them rather than assume anything about them. Now then, in many ways, that's a great thing and a very important lesson, and I wouldn't disagree with it. However, as soon as I heard that, I did feel that's someone who only speaks one language. Only someone who would speak one language would probably say that in that way. So it's excellent advice. But if you speak two languages or more, you'll probably know this already. If you don't, then just think about it. Always speak to someone before coming to any conclusions about them. Whereas in fact, in a bilingual or multilingual atmosphere, you're probably going to have to come to some kind of conclusions before you start speaking to them, because in speaking, you will already have chosen a language, and to choose the language, you will already have come to some conclusions. Now then, you can always start your conversation sort of bilingually, but even that then sort of assumes something about them as well. So it's interesting from a linguistic point of view that the first meeting with someone linguistically is very, very important. The linguistic context will shape that meeting. And I think historically, actually, lots of us in Wales, and I'll include myself in this, have actually been quite poor about managing this. It's not something we always do very well in meeting someone when we're not sure which language they speak. You know, how do we deal with that situation? So that's the first thing I'm going to talk about today. Now then, these are generic images taken from websites. So I think anybody looks like this in real life on the whole. Maybe the bottom right, maybe the rest are posed. But you recognize these kinds of photographs. The reason I put them up there is, what do Welsh speakers look like? Well, all or any or none of these, of course, could be Welsh speakers. Welsh speakers do not look like anything in particular. English speakers don't look like anything in particular either. You know, we don't judge people on their appearances in that way. As I said, all of these or none of these, or half of them, or a third of them, or three quarters could speak Welsh. We don't know. They are, of course, some imaginary people in this case, but we shouldn't make assumptions about anybody on how they look in that sense. So what do we do? You know if your staff are bilingual? It's an interesting question. It's often the case that people keep their bilingualism out of the workplace. Even if they know there are other, say, Welsh speakers there, they might not necessarily want to identify themselves in the workplace as bilingual. So does your workplace culture encourage staff to use their bilingual skills in the first place? Or even just be bilingual? Great deal of what we do at work isn't really producing things. I mean, we have chats and corridors over cups of teas, or at least we did when we were on in buildings than we do on Zoom now. There's a great deal that goes on informally that allows people just to be bilingual, which is different from using your bilingual skills in order to produce documents or give presentations or anything else. So does your workplace culture encourage staff to use their bilingual skills and just be bilingual? So I'm going to give you a quick thought experiment now. Imagine that you don't speak any Welsh, but a new member of staff comes up to you and starts speaking to you in Welsh. They seem to be very friendly, enthusiastic, but you don't understand a word other than bore da, good morning. That's all you understand, nothing else. So you're slightly off guard there, but what do you say? I'll just pause there for a little while. I know we can't really chat together, but I'll just let you think about that. Maybe this has happened to you. Maybe you've been the person speaking Welsh and this has happened. So you don't speak Welsh, lovely person, very friendly, you don't understand a word other than it's Welsh. What do you say? So we've got some comments there on the chat, which is great. Now then, before answering this question, I would actually take a step back. In real life, we probably don't have time to do this, but this is where we have a course like this to give us time to think about it. What I would say, before answering questions like that, think about what outcome you'd want from a conversation like this. What do you want to happen in very general terms? And I'd suggest that what you want to happen is something like this. The person I've just met feels good. When you're meeting someone for the first time, you want them to feel good about that meeting. And if they feel good, you'll feel good. And that's it, really. If everyone feels good, that's a great start. So that's what you want to come out of it. You don't really want to have any sort of philosophical outcomes or any detailed discussion on language policy or anything. You just want really to meet someone and you both feel good and comfortable with each other. Now then, so how to achieve that? As I said, I feel this is something we're not always very good at it in Wales. Now then, I have had personally some bad experiences. And Welsh speakers often will have had some bad experiences, so they themselves, might be slightly nervous when this happens. I've been shouted at sometimes for starting conversation in Wales, in Welsh, not in the workplace, but just ordering a drink in a pub in Welsh a while ago. Very, very rarely, does occasionally happen, and you do tend to remember it. But most times, nothing like that happens. But how to get the best out of this situation? Now then. What I would say is, I would avoid one word personally, and this isn't the worst thing you can say by any means, because I've said I've had people just shout English at me a couple of times, but that's not much over sort of 30 years really. But one thing I would avoid actually is this one: sorry, I'm not Welsh. We'll come back to the sorry in a minute. But I'm not Welsh. Now, why would I avoid saying that? Of course, I'm assuming the person speaking is not Welsh, but why avoid that? Well, you don't have to be Welsh to speak Welsh. There's plenty of people, thousands and thousands of people who are not Welsh, but speak Welsh. Plenty of them. That's my family background, actually, where some of my grandparents are from England, or they could speak Welsh, although they were English by birth, upbringing, everything. So you don't have to be Welsh to speak Welsh. It's also making an unnecessary assumption about the other person, really, in that you're kind of hinting that they expect you to be Welsh, but they weren't doing that. They were just speaking Welsh, and it sets up linguistic boundaries. It's almost saying, "Well, I'm not Welsh, so I don't have to engage with this. It's nothing to do with me." So I'm not Welsh, so I don't want to hear that again. It's sort of closing down that bilingual space. So speaking Welsh is not about being Welsh. I would say that these are different different things. So leave that to one side, the I'm not Welsh, or I'm English, or I'm anything else. Anybody can speak Welsh, doesn't matter where they're from. The other one is sorry there, and sorry is said in a very well-meaning way, but you do get conversations like this, and I've had lots of these. Someone speaks Welsh, the other person says, oh, I'm very sorry, I can't speak Welsh. Oh, there's no need to apologise, I thought you could, I'm sorry for that. Oh, no need to be sorry, it's my fault for not speaking Welsh. Oh, that's right, don't apologise. Oh, but my cousin's kids speak Welsh. Oh, that's nice. And this slightly awkward conversation of apologies. Now, there's nothing nasty here, there's no enmity or anything like that. It's all very polite, but it's all slightly awkward, and it could be done better. There's no need to apologise. We know that people's linguistic backgrounds are different, and in fact, why do I speak Welsh? Basically, because my parents spoke it to me. Was that my choice? No, that's what happened. It's nothing for me to be to claim any credit for in that sense. And if it hadn't happened, it wouldn't be something I should apologise for either. So I wouldn't apologise either. And just to do a little bit of sort of discourse analysis here in a sense, just bringing out the words here in this conversation. Sorry, I can't, no need, apologise, sorry, no need, sorry, fault, not speaking Welsh, don't apologise. It's more negative than it needs to be, and unless you're a kind of a Hugh Grant figure, this kind of conversation reminds me of a 1990s Hugh Grant who would be stumbling through these kind of apologies in a quite likeable way, so it's always possible to do that. But it's not the best way, I wouldn't have said, to start. It's a bit awkward. So what can we do? Rather than say sorry, I think there's people in Britain, I think we're very good at saying sorry, and hopefully thank you as well. So we could say something like this. Oh, I don't speak Welsh, but I'm glad you did. By the way, we need volunteers to arrange our St. David's celebrations. Can I put you down? I'm sure that's just your thing. Or, oh, I don't speak, but I'm really glad you did. We're trying to put Welsh at the heart of what we do here, show that it's relevant to all of us, and that's a good thing. My name's Jasmine, I'm really pleased to meet you. So the first one there, I don't speak Welsh, I'm really glad you did. That's great, it's positive. No one's apologising, but it's creating a positive atmosphere. Then, of course, there's a slightly patronising thing about St. David's Day celebrations. And more importantly, actually, it's making a kind of suggestion here. Well, you speak Welsh, therefore there are some extra jobs that you can do around the place, which perhaps isn't the best thing. The second one, although perhaps it goes a bit too far, is more positive and really inclusive. Oh, I don't speak Welsh, but I'm really glad that you did. We're trying to put Welsh at the heart of what we do here. So that's relevant to all of us. Okay, it's laying on a bit thick maybe, but it's a good thing. So if we look at the keywords there, glad, Welsh at the heart, what we do here, all of us, we is relevant to all of us, good, positive words like that, far better way to start these conversations. And I'm using this in a sense, of course, as a key really, or as a microcosm of how we can talk about Welsh in the workplace in a wider way. Make it open, make it about everybody, whether you speak Welsh or not. It's part of the culture of the whole organisation. So, yeah, so there's some comments there about being positive, yes, and showing an interest in what other people say, and in particular, if you are learning Welsh yourself, say that. There are courses available in various places, some of them free, obviously online as well. That's great. But if you're not doing that, obviously don't say that you'd like to. It's probably best to do it rather than talk about it. But just be positive. So it's a kind of cultural starting point, really. That's very important. So come back to that question about what is a Welsh speaker. We've said, Welsh speakers don't look like anything in particular. But Welsh speakers are a range of people. It's not one category. It could be someone who speaks Welsh at every opportunity. If they can, they will. It could be someone who feels that being a Welsh speaker is very much part of their identity. It's who they are. It's not just what they do, but it's who they are. And if you ask them, how would you see yourself? That'd be the first thing they would say. You also, people who can speak Welsh, but it's not their first language maybe. Their preferred language might be English. They'd be very happy to speak Welsh, but given an open choice, they would speak English. This category is very interesting. When you're working in a professional workplace, it could be someone with a very high level of education, professional experience and competence, but has only ever used Welsh in an informal context with family and friends. I have colleagues who've described themselves as being in this category. They might be internationally renowned scholars in various fields, scientists and academics, with an international reputation, fluent in Welsh, but because of the fields they're working in and the history of that field, when they did their training, it was all through English, no opportunity to use Welsh. They might actually be very fluent. They might always use Welsh with their friends where they can, but never use it professionally, never had the opportunity to use it professionally, and would actually be quite nervous about doing so. Unexpectedly so, in a sense, given their high level of education. So, especially if you're not bilingual, if you only speak one language, it's always worth thinking about, in fact, speakers will often be more comfortable in one language than the other in different circumstances. It's not just a sort of like for like. You don't have sort of two languages that you use exactly the same. Someone who's learning Welsh, yeah, they're Welsh speakers as well. Understand Welsh but never speak it. Well, I guess literally they're not Welsh speakers because they don't speak it, but they can understand it. And they're very happy to listen maybe in things in Welsh. Someone who can say a few words and phrases, yes. And then this one then for your organization. Is a Welsh speaker in your organization someone who regularly does things beyond the job description because they speak Welsh? And then this is a kind of sort of functional definition here, which we hinted at earlier. Do Welsh speakers in your office, in your organization, find themselves doing jobs that really they shouldn't be doing, but because they speak Welsh, they're asked to do them? I hinted earlier that, do you know who the Welsh speakers are in your organization? And you might have thought then, well, why wouldn't you know? Why wouldn't people be upfront about speaking Welsh? Well, it can happen, and does happen, not often, but it can happen, that Welsh speakers feel, oh, I'd rather keep quiet actually, because I can see around me those people who speak Welsh are asked to do extra things, to go the extra mile, or worse, to do things that they're not really comfortable with because they are the only ones who speak Welsh within that section of the organization. So, give you a very simple now then organizational chart here about responsibilities in a medium-sized corporation. Say you have social media manager, the website, got a web content team, press releases, you've got the comms team, radio and TV. Your senior managers will be trained to deal with those. You have community engagement, school liaison, various officers there who do this with the medium of English. Now, then this is a very extreme example now, but just to make the point, who does it in Welsh? Well, it might be John from accounts who speaks Welsh, who has to do all of this. He has to check the tweets when they go out, if they go out in Welsh, who has to check the website, who has to speak to the radio on behalf of the company, do an interview on TV, turns up with the schools or with the community engagement because he's the one who speaks Welsh. He's actually an accountant, he just speaks Welsh, and he's asked to do all of these things. And now then, we can understand then this isn't really very fair on John because he's not being recognised. He seems to be a superman in terms of what's asked of him. Now then, this is an extreme example, but I use it just to make the point. This might happen in your organisation, perhaps only one of these things, but if it does, it's worth thinking about, is this really fair on John, and is it the best thing for your organisation? And the other thing that's worth noting about bilingualism is that completely balanced bilinguals are rare. In other words, people who are equally adept and equally happy to use both of their languages in all fields of life, and they're equally, equally good at doing that. That actually is very, very rare and very unusual. It's not because it's a difficult thing in itself, and it's not because of any failure on the part of individuals. It's just because society is very rarely set up to give opportunities for people to develop their bilingual skills equally. Because most in Wales, vast majority of professional workplaces operate through the medium of English. So the percentage of the population who have an opportunity to develop their bilingual skills in a balanced way is very, very small. Now, I'm really lucky. As I explained earlier, I work in a Welsh language environment within my school, the School of Welsh, but within a wider English medium context on the whole, not completely, but on the whole. So I do get the opportunity to use both of my languages at a high level, and because of that, because I'm required to do it and because I enjoy doing it, I'm used to doing it and I'm happy to do it. But that's really a function of where I work rather than a function of who I am as such. And I'm in a lucky position, really, a fortunate position there. But it's actually quite rare for people to be totally balanced in that sense. But unless you're bilingual yourself or multilingual, you might not be aware of that. You might just assume, well, because they've got these skills in English, they'll have these skills in Welsh. Jane is able to do the web page. I know that Jane speaks Welsh, therefore Jane will be able to do the Welsh language web page. Well, that's not necessarily true unless they've been trained or had the opportunity to learn how to do that. The other thing that Welsh speakers do regularly, or bilingual people do, is switch between two languages. They do it very regularly. The reasons for this, so there's all manner of reasons why people do it. For cultural reasons, fatigue is to show sort of sharing emotion, identity, quoting other people. Welsh speakers do move back and forth from Welsh to English all the time, and this can sometimes strike people who don't speak both languages as slightly strange, but it's totally natural. And it doesn't mean that they're Welsh or their English isn't good enough. It's what bilingual people do. So balanced bilinguals are very rare. And also people move back and forward between languages very commonly. And the other thing, of course, is that translation in particular, which is what people are often asked to do, is a professional skill. There's a sign here in Asda recently, alcohol-free. The Welsh says, alcohol am ddim, in a sense, alcohol for free. In other words, you don't have to pay for it. So alcohol-free, that phrase could mean both things in English, and if you ask, just put it on a piece of paper with no content. It's not unreasonable to come up with a translation here, but then it gets put up in a supermarket. The BBC grabs it, there's a story about it, and the poor individual in the office who was just helping out, who hadn't been given any training and been given sort of insufficient information really to produce this little translation, although it's only 3 words, ends up feeling dreadful. So remember, translation is a professional skill, even when it comes to, or especially sometimes, very, very short, 2-word phrase or a 3-word phrase. Now then, the good news is there is help out there. I talked about the Welsh Language Commissioner and the help that's available through the Commissioner and through the Welsh Government as well. We do in Wales have translation services. Some of them are professional, of course, paid for. But there are sort of limited, short translations which you can get free, depending on who you are, up to a certain word limit. So do use that facility, which is there to encourage the use of Welsh in the workplace. So in terms of staffing and Welsh, define your roles. Are you asking people to use their Welsh professionally in the workplace? And again, I'll refer you here to the Welsh Language Commissioners. Unfortunately, they've been the subject of a rather severe cyber attack recently, so the website has been down, but you can contact them directly. And they can help you with things about defining your roles. Is it a Welsh desirable role, or is it a Welsh essential role? Now, there is employment law, of course, around use of terms like this, but the research tends to show that these kind of terms are underused. People tend to be nervous about overusing them. In fact, the opposite tends to happen. You know, if Welsh language skills are needed in your organization, or bilingual skills, have you had a skills audit or linguistic audit? You know, do you know at team level, at role level, what type of skills do you need? So you don't end up then just turning to individuals who happen to have language skills, but who were appointed for other reasons. And always think, you know, if you were appointed to a role advertised as Welsh essential or Welsh desirable, what would you expect in that role? In terms of what you do, in terms of the sort of outputs that are required from you as an individual, but also the culture of the workplace that you would be joining, because recruiting staff, and in particular retaining staff, does relate to the culture of workplaces and, you know, the wider atmosphere in those, and the practices, the social practices. And some workplaces find it hard to retain Welsh-speaking staff, especially in areas where those skills are at a premium. And there are certain things I think we can think about to help us retain Welsh-speaking staff in our organizations. So I think if I was applying for a job, it was Welsh essential, Welsh desirable, I'd expect to be able to use my Welsh in a meaningful way, you know, regularly, and use it in a meaningful way, not just sort of once a month or something, but, you know, it would be a meaningful part of the role. And also I'd expect, or certainly very much hope, to work with other Welsh speakers, to be able to use Welsh sort of informally, not just say to respond to queries from external customers, or not just to go on the radio, you know, once every 3 months or something. I would hope to be able to work with other Welsh speakers, because, as I said, speaking Welsh is part of people's social identity, so they enjoy doing it. And it's a way of expressing themselves, and it's something they would like to do in a formal and informal way. Working in the language of choice, if your organization is more bilingual, and you are able to operate internally, perhaps for the medium of Welsh, that might be something else. Few are able to do this, but some are. But many do a mixture. So we operate in our department, in our School of Welsh, through the medium of Welsh internally, but on the whole, we engage with the wider university through the medium of English. So in terms of, in particular, retaining staff, what I would say is, you know, give people opportunities to come together to use their Welsh. Don't isolate Welsh speakers from other Welsh speakers, or from opportunities to use their Welsh language skills. You might have, say, 6 separate teams, and each one needs a Welsh speaker, someone with Welsh language skills. But if those 6 groups work separately effectively, is that the best way forward in terms of recruitment and retention? Because you are creating then a structure where the only people who aren't able to use the language of choice are probably the Welsh speakers, who are kept apart from each other almost deliberately, because you've decided to have the one Welsh speaker in the 6 teams. They're not able to engage with each other at all. Now then, you can go too far the other way, of course, and create, you know, put all Welsh speakers together because they speak Welsh, and there's no other reason for doing that. I was at a wedding a while ago, and there was a table for Welsh speakers, and it was just slightly strange. There was a young man of about 18, and then myself and my wife, and then I think two couples in their 80s. And because it was a Welsh-speaking group, they might not necessarily have put people together that way, given that nobody on that table knew each other before going to the wedding. So be sensible about it. Talk to people. Ask them, you know, how would they like to work? Are they getting their opportunities to speak Welsh as they would like, as they would wish? And this comes back then to questions of sort of values and ethos, really, which are great to have, and they're even better when we can adhere to them. I've just taken some here from the web. Working Welsh, we're proud to be a bilingual company delivering all our services in Wales in Welsh as well as in English. A minority of companies perhaps are able to do that, but if I saw that and I was thinking of applying there, I would assume that I would be able to use Welsh on a daily basis there. And it would effectively be a Welsh-speaking company. Another company here, we pride ourselves on delivering great service. It's one of our core values for customers and staff. For our stores in Wales, this means doing as much as is reasonable and practical to communicate bilingually in Welsh and English. Not as strong as the first one, but certainly shows a commitment there. The words reasonable and practical, of course, suggests that there are they won't go as far as the first company there. But these things will appeal to Welsh-speaking applicants. But you need then to follow up really and create an ethos that makes it a pleasant place to be as a Welsh speaker. Even the United Kingdom government now, who historically perhaps haven't been forthcoming in terms of communicating bilingually, this is the UK government now, here on their website make a very clear point that the Welsh language is for everybody, not just for fluent speakers. Conversing with audiences in Welsh as well as in English demonstrates respect for Welsh speakers and a genuine understanding of the renewed focus on the language in every part of Wales. And that for many people in Wales, Welsh is an integral part of their identity. So more and more bodies are making public statements around the Welsh language in this kind of way. But sometimes things don't go so well in examples like this. Now, we talked earlier about what was reasonable and practical. Sometimes, with the best will in the world, people will send this type of email to Helen. We can imagine that Helen being a Welsh speaker. I know we normally provide bilingual materials in cases like this, but time is short and we're all a bit stressed. I know you speak Welsh, so is it okay with you if we don't have Welsh materials this time? Now then, in a sense, it's showing concern and showing awareness that, you know, Helen would like these things to be bilingual, but it's not really about Helen, is it? And it's asking Helen here to make a choice really between sort of her values, someone who values having things bilingually, having to set that against the well-being of other staff who are stressed and under great pressure. It's not a very fair question to ask of someone. And in my experience, 95% of the time, someone like Helen will answer and they'll say, that's okay, I know you're stressed, you know, don't worry about it. But equally, Helen will feel rather uncomfortable in that she's had to, in a sense, go against her own values. She's had to make a decision not to use, not to have the bilingual material, and it's been put on her shoulders, really. And she will have a nagging feeling that if someone in the future raises this, someone might say, well, Helen was okay with this last time. So if this kind of scenario happens, first of all, obviously try and avoid it, but things do happen. If this kind of thing comes up, don't place it at the door of the Welsh speakers. I think it's for others, or they might, you know, others to make decisions, whether they speak Welsh or not, but not to seek out the individual Welsh speakers and say, well, is this okay with you? Because we think we'd rather not do it. It's not, it gives the impression of being inclusive, but actually when it comes to it, isn't really that inclusive. It does put an extra burden really on Welsh speakers in this situation. So as I said, well-meaning, but probably something to avoid. So coming towards the end now, to go back to very positive things, creating a positive culture, lead from the front, you know, do things bilingually. Email signatures, staff email signatures, I mean, can they be done bilingually? If so, great. Put Welsh first, even better, or alternate the languages. This is what happens in Cardiff University for emails from the Vice-Chancellor, always bilingual. Sometimes Welsh first, next time it'll be English first. Use simple phrases with everybody, face-to-face or on email, you know, bore da, diolch yn fawr, or start meetings like that. It's very easily done, and it does make a difference. Pronounce personal names properly. That's an important one. Ask if you're not sure. We'll come back to that in a little while, I think. Amazing how many people will mispronounce names, not just Welsh names, any names. This can carry on for years and years, if not decades, really. So it's quite hard for anybody, if they've let it go once, to then correct the person later on. And the person they're talking to might be their boss, and they got the name wrong in the first meeting, and it becomes awkward then to change things. Ask. No one's going to mind. Just ask. Make sure you get them right. And it's made me more aware of people with names in other languages, languages that I don't know, but because I'm aware of sometimes people in Wales get their names mispronounced continually, it's made me more aware of the need for me to make an effort and listen to other people when they say their own names. So use Welsh when addressing teams or whole staff groups, and as I said, don't apologise. I tend to encourage people not to apologise. Don't start by saying, well, apologies to all the Welsh speakers who probably won't understand this, and then say something in Welsh. Better just to take a little time and say it properly, and people will appreciate it. Will appreciate it for what it intends to do. If you apologise, you're almost saying, well, I haven't bothered to learn it properly, but I'm going to say it anyway, so don't apologise. Just do it as well as you can. That's all you can do. You don't have to be perfect. People don't expect perfection. Interesting, just in The Guardian this week, actually, Tandy Newton, or Tandiwe Newton, famous actress, said that she'd used an anglicised version of her name for 30 years. And now is asking people to pronounce the name properly, feeling that she should have really done this 30 years ago. And Kamala Harris, actually, her name was sometimes deliberately mispronounced during the recent election campaign in the States. And she's made the point that it's an important thing. I like this. It's the first gift a child usually receives from their family. So it is an important thing, and people do appreciate when you get it right. And people are happy for you to ask and ask again, is that right? That's perfectly fine, and it's well worth doing that. As I said, I should do more of it myself with people with names that I'm not familiar with. And support staff if they need it. Attacks on people for speaking Welsh are rare. They don't happen very often, but they can happen. Comments, negative comments, they can happen. Most Welsh speakers will have had it happen to them, not very often, but they probably will have had it. So remember that languages don't exist without speakers. When people are attacking a language, they're really attacking the people who speak that language. If no one spoke Welsh, no one would ever make negative comments about Welsh. It's because people do speak Welsh that people make negative comments about it. So comments about language are really comments about Welsh speakers. So they can happen. If it does happen, support staff, show them that you're supportive and you don't accept kind of languages. I mean, even recently, the Times this week or last week, the travel editor you'd think would be familiar with seeing other languages compared Welsh place names to a cat walking across a keyboard, which is something Welsh speakers often hear. Remarkable, really, that a travel editor of a major newspaper would have that attitude towards languages. But these things are repeated. Still exists, this kind of linguistic xenophobia. Still exists in mainstream media. Welsh has no vowels. Various things that make Welsh out to be a strange language or a weird language or an abnormal language. And historically, this kind of thing has been part and parcel of excluding Welsh from much of public life. Well, Welsh is a strange, weird language, illogical language, therefore, why should we use it in public life? As I said, it's rarer, but it's not gone. So staff shouldn't have to deal with this in the workplace, and it's not banter. I don't think so, really. Or some people might say, well, I'm Welsh and I find it funny, but it's really, at the end of the day, attacking someone's language is attacking them. And in particular with lesser used languages, with the imbalance of power there, it's not an attractive thing to hear. And I would imagine that staff would feel awkward if they were in a workplace where this type of thing went on. In a sense, I don't think it does very much in workplaces. I think it's much worse in the media, even mainstream media. But support your staff as you would in any other way. So Welsh is valued for its own sake. It's not seen even in a well-meaning way as strange or exotic. It's just a normal thing. sometimes you get comments, such a nice name, what is it in English? Well, it's a Welsh name, value it in Welsh. You don't ask English people or people with English names to sort of explain the meaning of their names. Just, names are names. Do you dream in Welsh? Well, again, why would be any difference in Welsh from any other language? Creating hierarchies of Welshness, your proper Welsh, your real Welsh. Sometimes Welsh speakers will get this, which tends to make them feel uncomfortable because 99% of the time they don't want to create a hierarchy and put themselves at the top. But sometimes this happens. Again, something I would avoid. Do you speak Welsh at home? Well, again, questions about your home life, not necessarily appropriate, but why? You wouldn't ask anybody who spoke English whether they spoke English at home, probably. Just treat Welsh as a normal language. Comedy words in Welsh, these don't actually exist really in proper Welsh. Popty Ping for microwave, or Scodlin Wibbly Wobbly, these joke names, just treat Welsh as normal, as everything else. And just to finish then, are the linguistic implications for your work on diversity, your work to encourage diversity in other ways? Good example recently, putting pronouns on emails. This is done in English, and they will do this in Welsh as well, but actually there are choices to be made, which pronouns to put down. The Welsh pronoun system is different from English. The French system is different again. It's not a simple matter of translation. So if you want everybody in your workplace to feel that they are able to do this type of thing, well, you need to support people in both languages to do so. So conclusions, be positive, and that's really the most important one. Think about what being a Welsh speaker in your organization means. What does that mean? How does it feel? And how are Welsh speaking staff able to use the language? Do your Welsh speaking staff stay? And if not, why not? And what can you do to improve everyone's experience of Welsh? So back to that one, be positive. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much. I know that's a whistle-stop guide to some things about managing bilingually, leading bilingually, but I hope you found it useful, and I'm very happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you very much, Dylan. We have had a question come through, and that is, how can Welsh culture be more generally included in the workplace?
Well, if you're talking about Welsh culture more generally, there's always a risk in going for the sort of cliches, isn't there? Assuming that everyone likes rugby, or putting pictures of dragons up, or daffodils, which is the one thing we tend to avoid when we're trying to ask colleagues to produce some visual imagery for us in the School of Welsh. But there are things that Welsh speakers take particular interest in. The National Eisteddfod, for instance, which is a particular Welsh-speaking event, so a presence there, or engaging with those kind of things, much more meaningful. If you're celebrating St. David's Day, that's a great thing to do, so the Welsh National Day. But don't necessarily ask Welsh speakers to arrange it, or the same group of people to arrange it. Don't identify one group, or they're the Welsh crowd and they can do that. Do things for everyone as part of a wider program. So although this is about language in general, I think if you make people feel welcome in their Welshness and comfortable, whether they speak Welsh or not, about having Welsh around them, then that's a big improvement. I mean, you can obviously do things like signage, a bilingual signage, that makes a big difference. Surprising, actually, how big a difference that makes. Lots of people I know who don't speak Welsh, they say when they drive across the border and see bilingual signs, they feel at home, even if they don't necessarily understand the signs. It's part of who they are. So certainly signage like that, telephone, messages, out of office emails, all of these things, I think go further in the end of the day than having some one-off occasion. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. I think that was the only question we had actually. So unless there's anyone else would like to post a question in the Q&A feature, I think we'll call it a day of the session. So it's just left to me to now say a big thank you to you, Dr. Dylan Foster-Evans, for some interesting insights there. Thank you very much to the attendees as well. I mentioned at the beginning that this is the very first of a schedule of two weeks worth of sessions that we're running on quite a wide variety of topics. We'll be sending out a feedback questionnaire at the end of the 2 weeks of the online session in around a fortnight's time. And then finally, feel free to follow us and the Cardiff University CPD unit on social media, where we're fairly active. I think we've got a couple of comments. Yeah, just saying thank you. So no more questions. That's great. Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone.